Hi, this is Tara. Welcome to Sky Gazing. Today we're starting the Sadhana Pada, which is the study of the second chapter of Patanjali's Yogasutras. Now, in this chapter, he begins by an explanation of kriya-yogaḥ, by way of also telling us that the Sadhana Pada, which is commonly kind of commentated upon as being a chapter more for beginners. However, BKS Iyengar will explain why it is not just so. It is the more practical chapter. It is the chapter on the basics, because having ended with this exalted ascent into Nirbija Samadhi, Patanjali says that, okay, I know I've explained that to you, and maybe we are not all there. So this is how you can get there. And so he begins by explaining what is kriya-yogaḥ, what is action, what are kleshas, the afflictions? How can we overcome them? How do we overcome negative thoughts? He also explains the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, in much more detail. He explains the yamas, the niyamas, pratyahara, sense withdrawal. He also explains asana and pranayama, which is control of breath. Now, these operate at a more physical level, so that as beginners, we are able to bring some control to the body and the mind, and before we get into samadhi. So let's begin with the first sutra of the Sadhana Pada, which is tapaḥ svādhyāya-īśvara-praṇidhānāni kriyā-yogaḥ, which is basically what he's saying is tapasya, swadhyaya, self-effort, and Ishwara-praṇidhana, which is surrender or devotion to God, is the path of kriya-yogaḥ. Kriya is sometimes translated as action, but it actually means the work. It is the doing. It is the performing. It is the undertaking. So, and yoga is the union. So this is the undertaking. Just briefly, I wanted to explain that tapas actually comes from the root tap. Tapas is often translated as penance, very severe austerities, asceticism, standing on one leg at the top of the Himalayas and all that kind of thing, which it is. But tapas comes from the root tap. Tap is heat. It is the generation of heat. And as any practitioner of yoga knows, which is why, especially in Ashtanga yoga, Mysore style Ashtanga, we have this rule of using oil on Sundays, because you need it to bring the heat in the body down, because a consistent and regular practice of yoga generates so much heat in the body that you can actually feel it. This heat, while it is in modern terms, it's described as this metabolic heat, right? It's good to boost your metabolism, helps you lose weight and all of that, digestion. It is what is heat? Heat is basically the primordial prana. It is the base metabolic fire by which the world was created. It is that blazing heat by which your life breath is sustained, and it is that which is the touch point between your own primal self and the primal ordinance of the universe. It is that fire. And Swami Satyananda explains a little far more eloquently and deeply, and also appropriately to the context. But I just wanted to explain that tapas is not always just austerity or deprivation of oneself. Swadhyaya is often translated as study of the self, but it is also, according to, for instance, Mysore style Ashtanga, it is self-effort. And also, I think, according to BKS Iyengar. Ishwara-praṇidhāna, Patanjali has already explained in the Samadhi Pada, which is surrender, devotion, dedication to God. It is also surrendering the fruit of action to God. As explained earlier, the Sankhya philosophy does not believe in a personal God or a creator God. So to understand Ishwara, you must go back to the Samadhi Pada and listen to those sutras. Kriya, as I said, is the work. So how does Maharshi Ved Vyasa explain? he says purificatory action, which is how he translates tapas, study, and making God the motivation of action is the yoga of action. Here I feel obliged to explain that purificatory action isn't simply bathing. It isn't simply washing. It isn't saying you are impure and I am pure. It is purificate. What is it that we are purifying? That is why the Samadhi Pada comes first. That is why the aim of yoga is told to us in Sutra 3, so that we don't misunderstand sutras like this. Though logically you might think Samadhi Pada should come after the Sadhana Pada. It is because we are not classifying each other and ourselves as pure or impure. It is because the aim is to purify the perception, the chitta, to such an extent that it is clear of modifications. We are purifying ourselves from this entanglement with Prakriti, and we are attaining a state where the modifications, these diversifications of you, me, I, mine, other, this, that, cease to exist entirely. So it really doesn't matter how many times a day you bathe, or what you eat, or with who you are, or where you were born, because ultimately each and every one of those things is a vritti, it is a modification. So purificatory action means it's like the level at which all of us operate on these words is so mundane. It is so insignificant because, even when we sit at meditation and we try and control our thoughts and we say, oh, I thought bad things about my neighbor today and therefore I am not a good person, I have not purified my mind, is humbug. In the long run, you and I, what we think on a day-to-day basis has nothing to do with our liberation. It is so not even a drop in the chitta, right? Because the chitta vritti nirodha is the cessation of these complete cycles. Thinking ill of your neighbor is not the only thing that is causing you to be reborn into this cycle of samsara. It is far greater than that, as we've seen in the Samadhi Pada. It is this identification with the self, identification with the body, and all these mini thoughts are just sort of tendrils in the larger scope of things. So we are trying to control this entire, seize the entire modification of vritti, of chitta into vrittis that multiply. And yes, of course, we want to still these ripples. We want to be good people. We want to practice yamas and niyamas. But sometimes we can get so sidetracked by the small things that we forget that it's a much larger task at hand. Just wanted, to hope that we can keep that in mind. So Maharishi Ved Vyasa says this is the study of yoga for he whose mind is outward directed. So a lot of the Samadhi Pada is inward directed. It is sit and close your eyes and consider, right perception, wrong perception, imaginary perception, sleep, dream, and memory. So, and the focus, the concentration upon the sense object, the devotion, everything is inwardly directed. In kriya-yogaḥ, what Patanjali is telling us is that there are people who need to act. They cannot sit and turn their minds inwards. So yoga is not given to one who is not undertaking purifying action. So he's also saying, one part is also that it is not sufficient to only be inwardly directed, because at the end of the day, we operate in this world, we live in this world, and therefore there is purifying action that we must undertake. Impurity is variegated by the eternal in the dwelling of the aroma of action and affliction, and is ever in contact with a network of enjoyables, simply because we are sensual beings, because we are equipped with the 5 karmendriyas, with the 5 jnanendriyas, because we operate amongst the panchabhutas and we are enmeshed and entangled among the elements of desire, the objects of desire in this world. We must therefore look to our action. It cannot be dispersed without purificatory action, that is tapas, Again, this does not mean we bathe 100 times before we mingle with the world, or that we don't touch people, or that we feel superior to others. It means that our actions must be detached, must be correct, must be backed by knowledge, backed by the knowledge of the fact that we are entangled with Prakriti and that we are attempting to disentangle. And if we keep that aim in mind, then what the actions that we perform in the world become tapasya, right? For this reason, tapas is taken up, he says. This is considered an action worthy of performance as it purifies the mind when not impeded. So actions that admire us in samsara are adharma. Actions that liberate us from samsara are dharma. So study is the repeated utterance of purifying words such as Om, or the reading of teachings about spiritual freedom, dedicating the actions to the highest teachers, devotion or surrender, and it allows us to check the motivation and detach from the fruit of action. Swami Satyananda says, Tapas, svādhyāya-īśvara-praṇidhānāni constitute kriya-yogaḥ. The word tapas, he says, literally means to burn, to create heat, to produce energy, and usually it is translated as asceticism. But it is said in the Bhagavad Gita that the fire of jnana, that is wisdom, burns the entire stock of karma, which means it burns the accumulated karmas, the current karmas, and the karmas that are already sacrificed. It is said by Nagarjuna that a seed, when not burnt, is capable of giving rise to many seeds and plants. In the same way, when the chitta is not freed from the samskaras, it is capable of producing many more samskaras, bodies, and reincarnations. A roasted or burnt seed becomes incapable of reproducing. This process is tapas, which involves self-purification. So when you understand tapas, when you understand samskara, you understand why the tapas is necessary to burn these seeds of reproducing karmic actions. So sometimes the impurity is small and needs little washing, but when avidya is too much, it becomes necessary to put the material impressions into a fire. So tapas is a sadhana which cleans an extremely dirty mind full of vidya, full of avidya. So tapas also means a conservation of heat and energy. It even creates physical heat as with pranayama. And the word tapas here is used in a very high context. So in Sutra 32 of the second chapter, Patanjali uses the word tapas again. There he uses it as an elementary sadhana. In this sutra, tapas is not used in the sense of austerity or penance, but in the sense of generating a kind of heat that is generated by pranayama, hatha yoga, mudras, and bandhas, and by concentration of mind, by brahmacharya or ahimsa. It is not only physical heat, it is also pranic heat, mental heat, and spiritual heat, and it has an essentially psychic nature. So he says it's basically you're cauterizing yourself. When you want to eliminate a bad habit, the more you want to get rid of it, the more powerful it becomes. When you abandon it in the waking state, it appears in dreams. So rather than suppress, most of us, when we say, okay, I will not get angry because somebody said this to me, what we're basically saying is, I will push that anger into my body, I'll push it into my subconscious mind, it'll emerge in a dream, it'll emerge as anger that is taken out on somebody else. So he's saying here, instead of suppressing it, you have to cauterize it. You have to eliminate it at the root. The samskara or complex must be eliminated. For that, a kind of psychic activity such as pranayama or ahimsa, which will uproot it even from the layers of the subconscious, is required, and the word tapas should be understood in this sense. And he said, in the same way, swadhyaya also needs an explanation because it means one's own analysis or one's own study, but it is also used for studying scriptures such as Bhagavad Gita or the Bible. That is not the meaning of swadhyaya in this sutra. It is the meaning in Sutra 32. Here it means trying to perceive your own self from different perspectives. When you look at your nose or teeth in the mirror, it is called adhyaya of your own face. That is a detailed study. You're sort of examining yourself. Likewise, swadhyaya means a detailed study of your own self, which includes the study of your entire structure of your personality, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. In kriya yoga, the different practices lead to an enhanced perception of the self. There's a process of seeing your own consciousness through multiple perspectives. So if you're trying to visualize a psychic smell, you perceive yourself in the form of smell. This is swadhyaya, wherein you're looking at your own, you're examining your own consciousness. Thus, in this sutra, the word swadhyaya does not mean the study of scriptures or doing japa. You will note that the other commentators disagree, and they do believe, such as Maharishi Ved Vyasa himself believes he's referring to the study of the scriptures. But Swami Satyananda says he uses the same word with different meanings in different contexts. Same with Ishwara-praṇidhānāni. Usually it means surrender to God, but here it means placing completely one's trust in innermost awareness, which means placing your consciousness completely, of fusing it completely in inner awareness. So he's asking for that unification of awareness. So Ishwara, he says, is inner awareness. It is not personal self anywhere outside. It is within us. And in kriya yoga, you have the kriya in which the mind is placed completely at the disposal of the inner self. So you're surrendering to this inner consciousness. So kriya yoga is a practical yoga with practical techniques. It involves self-purification, self-observation, and evolving self-awareness. These three acts constitute kriya yoga. It may also be explained as certain kriyas producing heat and conserving heat, which involves awareness of the self, and kriyas by which your mind is placed at the disposal. So there are specific sadhanas by which heat can be further generated. So kriya yoga is one of the methods of Raja Yoga. Since it is not customary to write anything about kriya yoga, the Rishi has given one sutra to it. Why? Because some practices have to be taught by a present master. They cannot just be written down and followed, because they are dangerous, right? And they should not be misused. Swami Vivekananda says mortification, study, and surrendering fruits of work to God are called kriya yoga. So those samadhis with which we ended our last chapter, Swami Vivekananda explains, are very difficult to attain, so we must take them up slowly. The first step is kriya yoga, which means walking towards yoga. The organs are the horses, the mind are the reins, the intellect is the charioteer, the soul is the rider, the body is the chariot. The master of the household, the king, the self of man, is sitting in this chariot. If the horses are very strong, they do not obey the reins. If the charioteer, the intellect, does not know how to control the horses, the chariot will come to grief. But if the organs, the horses, are well controlled, the reins, the mind, are well held in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, the chariot reaches the goal. What is meant, therefore, by mortification, which is how he translates tapasya? Holding the reins firmly while guiding his body and mind, not letting the body do anything it likes, but keeping them both under proper control. So he's using tapasya to say this constraint, this control over the body, mind, and senses. What does he say is meant by study? Not novels, fiction, storybooks, but study of that which teaches the liberation of the soul. It does not mean controversial studies. The yogi is supposed to have finished his period of controversy. He's had enough of all that debate and become satisfied. He only studies at this point to intensify his conviction. So this is not the stage at which you're saying, oh, but that contradicts this. You're saying, okay, this is what I believe. How do I further and deepen this knowledge? Vada and Siddhanta, these are the two kinds of scriptural knowledge. Vada is the argumentative, Siddhanta is the decisive. When a man is entirely ignorant, he takes up Vada, and when he has completed, he takes up Siddhanta. So here, Patanjali is talking about Siddhanta. It is the intensification of knowledge. So books are infinite in number, time is short, therefore pick up that which is essential and work with it. And he says intellectual gymnastics may be necessary at first, because you should not have blind conviction. But once you're done with all of that, then just focus on deepening your knowledge. And by surrendering the fruits of work to God is to take to ourselves neither credit nor blame, but to give up both to the Lord and be at peace. BKS Iyengar says, burning zeal, which is how he translates tapasya. Note the different translations of tapasya in each bhashya. In practice, self-study and study of scriptures and surrender to God are the acts of yoga. So he says, for Patanjali, the practice of yoga is the yoga of action. Kriya-yogaḥ composed of tapas, self-discipline, swadhyaya, self-study, and surrender to God. So tapas is the blazing desire, BKS Iyengar says, to burn away the impurities of the body, sense, and mind. Swadhyaya is the repetition of sacred mantras, study of spiritual texts in order to comprehend oneself. Surrender of one's body, mind, and soul to God is Ishwara-praṇidhānā. So many commentators consider that this pada is meant for the novices, but he says this is not true because the reason they think that is that novices have this fluctuating consciousness, but he says that a lot of evolved souls also have fluctuating consciousness. So this pada is applicable to everybody. So BKS Iyengar says from this pada onwards, both beginner and the evolved learn how to stabilize the mind. The instructions, which are very practical, allow the soul to progress more rapidly towards purity and emancipation, and the disciplines of purifying the body, speech, and mind constitute kriya-yogaḥ, the path to perfection. So our bodies are purified by self-discipline, by self-study and surrender. So karma, jnana, and bhakti, the path of action, is the discipline of the body. Jnana is the knowledge of self-study from. But what are we studying? It's not just scripture. We're using scripture and texts and books to understand our bodies from the skin to the core and back again. Bhakti is the path of love and surrender to God. The sadhna pada identifies all three paths. The first is the path of life. The second, jnana, is the path of wisdom. And the third leads to God. Osho says, kriya-yoga is a practical preliminary yoga, and it is composed of austerity, self-study, and surrender to God. And the first is austerity. He says, tapasya is not torturing the body. Torturing is violent. So whether you torture yourselves or others, it is violent, and violence can never be religious. What is the difference between torturing someone else's body and torturing your own body? Austerity does not mean torture. It means a simple life, an austere life. Why is it a simple life? Because the more complicated life gets, the less sensitive you will be. So he says when Patanjali says austerity, he means be simple. Don't cultivate it, by which I think he means don't live a contrived life. Because cultivated simplicity is not simplicity. How can a cultivated simplicity be simple? This is like, the modern trend of minimalism, where people have claim to have very few things, but those few things are highly, highly expensive and niche. So in order to be cool in minimalism, or people say they're organic, but then you're buying almond milk, which is then decimating bee colonies. So simplicity is just genuine simplicity. It is just doing without. And he's saying then your needs will come down, your desires are met, and because they are fewer. Food, shelter, love, just have a couple of basic things. And that's all you need. The more you're possession oriented, the less happy you will be. So when Patanjali says self-study, he also means self-remembering, or what the Buddha said was right mindfulness, what Jesus said meant by being more alert, what Krishnamurti means when he goes on to saying, be aware. When you have nothing to do, nothing much to do, the simple things of the day finish, where will the energy move? What will become of your energy? Right now, you never have enough energy. But if you keep your life simple, then the energy moves to the knowledge of the self. You're able to sit silently, you're able to become self-aware, you're able to observe yourself, you're able to watch yourself. And he says, then the barriers drop, and then the surrender to God can happen. And people keep asking how to surrender, he says, and the surrender is just simply dropping those barriers having that energy to turn inwards and surrender to God is the state of non-ego within you. It's not an act. There is no effort. It is just, if there is effort, he says, there is no surrender. It is just completely dropping that ego. It's a realization. When you are aware the flame is burning high, suddenly you realize the darkness is not there. So therefore, Osho says these are interrelated things: austerity, self-study, and surrender to God. Barbara Stoller Miller translates it as the active performance of yoga involves ascetic practice, study of sacred law, and dedication to the Lord of Yoga. So she says Patanjali now turns from defining the nature of yoga to the practical core of the teachings. The active performance of yoga, known as kriya-yoga, is a threefold discipline involving ascetic practice, study, chanting, and dedication to God. These three elements constitute niyamas of the Ashtangas. Some commentators regard the active performance of yoga as the first 5 limbs of yogic practice rather than yamas and niyamas alone. But she says that Patanjali's text itself makes these 3 elements of Kriya Yoga part of observances. So the 3 highlighted here emphasize the efficacy in preparing a yogi for arduous discipline that leads to pure contemplation by diminishing forces that obstruct the path. So what she's basically saying is, if you go to Patanjali's text, you'll see that he's included these 3 aspects, that is tapasya, that is swadhyaya, and that is Ishwara-praṇidhāna, as the essential part of the observances, that is the yamas and the niyamas, that because they get practice, they drop the barriers or the obstacles to progress on the path and sort of smoothen the path towards samadhi. So the divine yogi, she says, is a model for the practitioner who strives to eliminate the corrupting forces that make life painful. This was the first sutra of the Sadhana Pada. I hope it is useful to you. Do like, share, subscribe, send your questions and comments. Thank you.